Hello and welcome to the Minimum Competence episode for Monday, December 9th, 2024. I'm your host for today, Andrew Leahy, a tax and technology attorney from New Jersey. On today's episode, we cover the fight over Infowars' social media accounts, TikTok's bid to block a U.S. crackdown, and Google suing the CFPB over financial oversight claims. Let's remember, this week, let's strive not for perfection, Lord knows I never do, but for progress, and read today's legal news. On this day in legal history, December 9th, 2000, 24 years ago now, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a 5-4 decision to stay the recount of presidential election votes in Florida, a pivotal moment in one of the most controversial elections in American history. The recount had been ordered by the Florida Supreme Court after a contentious election between George W. Bush and Al Gore left the outcome hinging on Florida's 25 electoral votes. The Supreme Court stay temporarily halted efforts to resolve disputes over hanging chads and other ballot irregularities in a highly scrutinized manual recount process. This pause set the stage for the landmark decision in Bush v. Gore 3 days later. On December 12th, the court ruled that the recount violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, effectively ending the process and cementing George W. Bush's victory. The court's majority held that varying standards for counting votes across Florida counties were inherently unequal, and there was insufficient time to establish uniform procedures before the Electoral College deadline. The decision was deeply divisive, with the dissenting justices arguing that halting the recount undermined public confidence in the democratic process. Critics of the ruling contended that it set a dangerous precedent by involving the judiciary in the electoral process, while supporters claimed it ensured a timely resolution in an unprecedented situation. Ultimately, the ruling awarded Bush the presidency by a margin of just 537 votes in Florida. The case has since been a flashpoint for debates about judicial impartiality and election integrity. It underscored the significance of state-level election laws and highlighted vulnerabilities in the U.S. electoral system that continue to shape legal and political discourse to this day. A legal showdown involving Alex Jones' Infowars, Elon Musk's X Corp, and The Onion centers on the ownership and transfer of social media accounts in bankruptcy proceedings. Infowars is being sold to The Onion's parent company, Global Tetrahedron LLC, as part of Jones' bankruptcy to cover $1.4 billion in defamation judgments owed to Sandy Hook families. However, X Corp has filed objections asserting that it owns Infowars accounts under its terms of service and has the right to control their transfer or use. The Onion's winning bid, supported by some Sandy Hook families who agreed to defer payments, is under scrutiny for its structure and fairness. Judge Christopher Lopez will decide whether X's claim to ownership under its terms of service, which prohibits account transfers without consent, supersedes the bankruptcy estate's right to sell interest in the accounts. X's lawyers argue that the accounts are licenses, not assets, and therefore cannot be transferred. This legal stance aligns with prior cases that emphasize the authority of social media companies' terms of use. This dispute highlights X's aggressive stance under Musk's leadership in asserting control over account transfers, even as it risks alienating users. The case also raises broader questions about the transferability of accounts on other platforms like Gab and Truth Social, which may have similar restrictions. The outcome could set precedents in determining how social media accounts are treated in bankruptcy, a legal area still in its infancy. ByteDance, the Chinese parent company of TikTok, and the app itself have requested a temporary halt to a U.S. law requiring ByteDance to divest TikTok by January 19th of 2025 or face a ban. The companies filed an emergency motion with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia seeking relief while they petition for a review by the U.S. Supreme Court. They argue that the law would force TikTok, a major platform with over 170 million monthly U.S. users, to shut down just before a presidential inauguration. The divestment law, passed earlier in 2024, reflects ongoing concerns over national security risks linked to TikTok's ownership by a Chinese company. ByteDance contends the law undermines free speech and harms millions of American users and creators who rely on the platform for communication and income. The court's decision will determine whether the app remains operational during the Supreme Court review process. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that's the CFPB for those in the know, has asserted supervisory authority over Google Payment Corp., a subsidiary of Alphabet Inc., as part of expanding oversight of non-bank financial platforms. This decision could lead to regulatory exams, though it does not imply any misconduct by Google. The CFPB stated that Google Payment Corp. Meets the legal criteria for supervision, citing potential consumer risks linked to remaining balances in discontinued Google Pay accounts. Google quickly filed a lawsuit challenging the CFPB's authority, calling the move an example of government overreach. The company argues that the U.S. version of its Google Pay peer-to-peer payment service no longer exists and has posed no risks to consumers. Google contends that the CFPB's decision is legally flawed and lacks justification. The case reflects ongoing tensions between tech companies and financial regulatories as agencies like the CFPB increasingly focus on non-bank platforms. While the CFPB has been criticized for underusing its authority in this area, Google's response highlights concerns about regulatory overreach and its impact on innovation. And with that, and as always, I thank you so much for listening to Minimum Competence, your daily news podcast for lawyers. If you're looking for more than minimum competence, links to further reading on all the topics touched on today are in the show notes. And reviews go a long way towards helping new listeners to find our show. If you have a moment, leave a rating or review on your podcast player. We'd sure appreciate it. And if you know someone that might be interested in a story we cover, consider sending them the episode. But remember, nothing here should be construed as legal advice because it is certainly not that. Minimum Competence is available at minimumcomp.com and wherever it is you get your finely crafted podcasts. If you haven't checked out the website in a while, give it a look. There are complete transcripts and resources for each episode and its corresponding segments, as well as an opportunity to receive new episodes in email, newsletter, form. We'll see you back here tomorrow, and until then, remember, rise with the sun and start the week with purpose, coffee, and bagels.